The void was silent, a vast and endless sea of darkness where stars glimmered like distant indifferent gods. In that silence, the warp screamed. Its howls were not heard by mortal ears, but felt deep in the marrow of existence, a violent tremor that reverberated through the immaterial and the material alike. Ships scattered across the segmentum obscurus reported sudden, inexplicable malfunctions. Astropaths clutched their skulls and shrieked until their eyes burst, their final messages lost in static. Somewhere, deep within the eye of terror, the madness of the warp swirled into a singular point, collapsing inward as though creation itself were inhaling. Then it tore open. The rift blossomed into being with an explosion of sickly light, casting eerie illumination across a dead, nameless system. Jagged tendrils of raw warp energy lashed outward, caressing barren worlds and scouring ancient moons to ash. Through that wound in reality, something vast and oppressive pushed its way into the galaxy, a presence not of this universe, yet now indelibly a part of it. From the heart of the maelstrom, a lone vessel emerged, charred and half-melted by its journey through the infernal storm. Its design was foreign, lacking the brutal Gothic architecture of imperial craft or the organic terror of Tyrannid bioships. Inside, the figure lay unmoving, his black armor battered but unbroken. The once pristine surfaces were scored with deep gouges, rents burned by forces beyond comprehension. His breathing, ragged and mechanical, filled the narrow cockpit with a rhythm both ominous and inescapable. Darth Vader existed, as he always had, at the edge of life and death. Here, in this strange and terrible new galaxy, his survival was both a miracle and a curse. The ship descended toward the nearest planet, its guidance failing as flames licked at its hull. Below stretched a bleak landscape of jagged mountains and storm-lashed plains. This world had been fought over for centuries, its surface marred by trenches, bombed-out fortresses, and rusting corpses of titans long slain. Imperial banners, torn and stained, still fluttered in the acidic wind. As Vader's vessel plummeted, Imperial Guard outposts scattered across the planet detected its entry. Panicked voices crackled across Vox channels, commanders barking orders to ready anti-air batteries. Unknown signature detected, a frightened sergeant reported, "Not Xenos, not Imperial. Emperor preserve us." "What is that thing?" Vader's ship struck the earth like a hammer from the heavens. The explosion threw ash and stone skyward, a mushrooming cloud visible for miles. Soldiers rushed to form defensive lines around the impact site, lasguns shaking in their hands. The smell of promethium and ozone filled the air. Through the haze, a silhouette emerged, a towering figure clad in black, his cape trailing like smoke, his lightsaber igniting with a sound unlike any heard on this world before. Fear rippled through the ranks. To these soldiers, hardened by years of endless war, the figure seemed not merely alien, but godlike. Some dropped to their knees, mistaking him for an emissary of the Emperor. Others screamed accusations of heresy, certain they faced a daemon. The conflicting cries escalated until panic broke their fragile discipline. Vader moved forward with the inevitability of a storm. His blade swept through the first squad in a blur of crimson light, bodies falling in silence. Bolter rounds and lasfire slammed into him, deflected by a barrier of unseen power. To the soldiers it seemed as though the air itself obeyed his will, twisting and crushing them with invisible hands. Within moments the Imperial line dissolved into chaos. Those who remained standing backed away, their courage shattered. Vader did not speak. His breath filled the void between heartbeats, a dark promise of annihilation. As he stood amidst the carnage, he extended his senses outward, probing this strange world with the force. What he felt was staggering, a universe soaked in blood and despair, its countless souls screaming in perpetual agony. There was no republic here, no rebellion, no remnants of the galaxy he once knew, only endless war, and a single blinding beacon of psychic energy far across the stars, a presence as vast and implacable as the dark side itself. For a moment beneath the iron mask, Anakin Skywalker stirred. Memories rose unbidden, the sands of Tatooine, the laughter of his children, the firelight on Padme's face. Then they were gone, smothered by the relentless tide of hatred and survival. He was Vader now, and this galaxy would either bend to his will, or be destroyed. Above the planet, Imperial ships scrambled to make sense of what their ground forces reported. The images sent back by terrified troopers were inconsistent and fractured. Some showed a dark-armored warrior wreathed in flame, others a winged abomination tearing men apart with unseen claws. On Terra, deep within the halls of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, a senior astropath collapsed mid-chant, clutching his head. In his final breath, he gasped a single phrase before his mind burned out entirely. "Something has come through." Across the galaxy the Astronomicon flickered, the Emperor's light, eternal and unyielding, dimmed for a single heartbeat before recovering. Among the High Lords of Terra, whispers spread like poison. Was this a sign of the Emperor's displeasure, or something far worse? Inquisitors sharpened their knives, each eager to claim control of the narrative. A new power had entered the great game, and none could yet tell if it was salvation or damnation. On the ravaged planet below, Vader stood amidst the wreckage of his arrival. Around him, the surviving Imperial Guard fell to their knees, trembling. They awaited judgment, uncertain whether this figure was saint or fiend. Vader looked down at them, his voice finally breaking the silence, low and resonant, like the tolling of a funeral bell. "Kneel," he commanded. They obeyed. Even those who moments ago had called him heretic pressed their faces to the dirt. In that instant, a new chapter of galactic history began. Vader turned his gaze skyward, toward the faint psychic beacon that burned like a star on the horizon. Somewhere beyond these stars was the power that ruled this galaxy. He would find it, and when he did, he would claim it. The wind howled across the battlefield, carrying with it the first whispers of a name that would soon echo through every Imperial world, a dark warlord who had emerged from the void itself. But the galaxy was vast, and many eyes were already watching. As the night deepened, shadows stirred, and unseen forces began to move toward the planet, drawn by the scent of a new contender for dominion. Something ancient and terrible had awakened, and it would not go unanswered. Smoke still curled from the crater where Vader's vessel had fallen, a bitter, acrid haze mingling with the stench of charred bodies and scorched metal. The battlefield was silent now, save for the wind, which moaned through broken fortifications and skeletal remains of tanks, long abandoned. Kneeling figures dared not raise their eyes, their faith shattered and reforged into something darker. Vader stood among them, a black monolith, against the pale light of a dying sun. The rhythmic hiss of his respirator was the only sound, steady and unyielding, like the pulse of some ancient machine, buried deep beneath the earth. His arrival had brought fear and submission, but not yet order. The scattered survivors of the Imperial Guard were fractured and unstable. Some whispered prayers to the Emperor, believing this black-armored figure to be a divine avatar sent to lead them. Others trembled in silent rebellion, certain he was a daemon clad in iron. Vader moved among them with silent precision, his presence alone enough to quiet their dispute. He was weak, though he would never reveal it. The journey through the warp had torn at his body as well as his mind, stripping even his formidable will to its raw edges. Each step was agony, each breath a reminder of his failing flesh beneath the armor. But weakness could not be permitted. Not here, not now. He surveyed the terrain, his gaze sweeping over the ruined bastions and gutted manufactoria that dotted the landscape. This world had been consumed by war long before his arrival. He could feel the echo of countless deaths imprinted on the soil, a psychic residue that clung to every shattered wall and rusted weapon. The force here was different, heavier, more violent, as though the very fabric of reality was suffused with suffering. It whispered to him, a constant chorus of rage and despair that threatened to drown out his own thoughts. Beyond the ruins, distant engines rumbled, a column of armored vehicles approached, their treads grinding over the bones of the fallen. The soldiers gathered around Vader tensed, unsure whether these were reinforcements or enemies. Vader ignited his lightsaber with a snap hiss that shattered the silence, the crimson blade casting hellish light across his black armor. The mere sight of it drove some men to their knees again, clutching at their rosaries and reciting fractured litanies of protection. The column halted, and from the lead chimera emerged a figure clad in the drab but ornate uniform of a planetary commander.
His face was hard and scarred, his eyes narrow with suspicion. Flanked by stormtroopers, he advanced cautiously, one hand resting on the hilt of his power sword. "In the Emperor's name," the commander called, his voice wavering despite his attempt at authority. "Identify yourself. What are you, stranger? Daemon or servant?" Vader's reply was slow and measured, his voice carrying the weight of a death sentence. "I am power. I am order. Kneel, and you may yet live." The commander faltered. Even the most disciplined soldier could not easily defy the presence that radiated from Vader, a crushing pressure that seemed to push directly against the soul. Several stormtroopers dropped their weapons and fell to the ground, whimpering. The commander gritted his teeth, defiance flickering briefly before being smothered. At last, he bent one knee. Vader advanced, extinguishing his blade but not the menace in his stance. Through the Force, he reached into the commander's mind, peeling back layers of fear and memory, as easily as tearing cloth. Images flooded him, a world besieged by endless raiding forces of chaos. The planet's defenses stretched thin, its populace starving and broken. The Imperial Guard here had been fighting a losing war for decades. The arrival of this black-armored figure was beyond comprehension, a disruption neither blessed nor cursed, but utterly alien. Vader released the commander, who staggered back, gasped. You are no servant of the Emperor," he stammered. "But you are no mere heretic either. What are you?" Vader did not answer. Instead, he turned his gaze to the horizon, where the clouds boiled unnaturally. In the distance, the rumbling of engines had been replaced by a new sound, a guttural chanting that rose and fell like the breathing of some monstrous beast. The air grew thick with a metallic taste of ozone, and the ground trembled beneath unseen steps. Vader knew this sensation. It was the same as when a dark side ritual approached completion, though magnified beyond anything he had experienced. Chaos was coming. The soldiers sensed it too. Panic spread like fire through dry grass, their fragile obedience fracturing under the weight of primal terror. The commander shouted orders, but his words were lost beneath the howls that now echoed from the mist. Figures emerged, twisted parodies of humanity, clad in rusted armor, and draped with symbols that seared the eyes. Traitor Marines and cultists surged forward in a tide of hatred, their war cries mingling with the gibbering laughter of daemons barely visible in the shadows. The Imperial line began to break. Men fled, stumbling over their fallen comrades. Vader moved forward alone, his saber igniting once more. To the Imperials it seemed he walked into a storm of madness. Without hesitation, the first wave of cultists crashed against him and died instantly, cleaved apart by sweeping arcs of crimson light. Bolter shells detonated around him, yet none struck true. With a gesture, Vader sent entire squads hurtling backward, their bodies crushed before they hit the ground. For the traitor Marines, this was no mere mortal foe. They recognized power, and they hungered for it. A champion stepped forward, his armor adorned with skulls and the writhing marks of his patron god. He bellowed a challenge, his massive chain axe roaring. Vader answered, not with words but with action, hurling the champion off his feet with an invisible grip, before bringing his saber down in a single decisive stroke. The traitor's head rolled across the blood-soaked ground, and for a heartbeat, silence reigned. The daemons screamed then, a sound that pierced the veil between worlds. The sky split open, raining warp fire. Even Vader staggered under the psychic onslaught, his body weakened from his earlier trial. For a moment, the black armor seemed to weigh 1,000 tons, his respirator hissing raggedly. In that instant of vulnerability, visions struck him: Padme's dying breath, Luke's defiance, the Emperor's laughter. His past clawed at him, threatening to tear him apart. But this was not his galaxy. These were not his demons. With a guttural roar, Vader banished the memories and drew upon the raw agony of this world. The Force surged through him like a tidal wave. He unleashed it in a single devastating burst, flattening the battlefield, scattering daemons and traitors alike, as though swept by an unseen hand. When the dust settled, the surviving Imperials stared in stunned silence. Vader stood at the center of a crater, his armor scorched and smoking, but unbroken. Though his strength was nearly spent, his stance remained unyielding. The commander approached cautiously, awe etched into every line of his face. "My lord," he whispered, voice trembling. The enemy, they are broken. You have saved us. Vader turned his head slightly, the mechanical rasp of his breath, the only reply. Within his helmet, his thoughts were cold and precise. These people were weak, their faith blind and brittle, yet they were tools, and in this strange galaxy, he would need tools. Gather your forces, he said at last, his tone brooking no argument. You will serve me, through me, you will find victory. The commander bowed low, his voice shaking. As you command, my lord. Above them, the clouds churned with unnatural fury. Far across the void, the psychic beacon of terror flared brighter. Sensing the disturbance, something vast and ancient had taken notice of the black-armored giant, who now stood amid the ruin. And in the darkness beyond the stars, the game had only begun. Far across the cold, endless void of space, beyond countless star systems and battlefronts, the beacon of the Astronomicon flickered. Its light, the psychic pulse, by which all Imperial vessels navigated the void, was constant and eternal, except now, for the briefest of moments, it had wavered like a candle in a storm. Across the Imperium, navigators gasped, as their third eyes bled tears of blood. Astropaths collapsed mid-chant, their mouths spilling fractured words before silence claimed them. The ripple was faint, but it reached terror itself, brushing the psychic aura of the Golden Throne and the broken, yet omnipotent will seated upon it. Deep within the sanctum of the Imperial Palace, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica descended into chaos. Servitors clicked and whirred as their mechanical voices reported conflicting reading. Lines of robed adepts scrambled through the endless hallways of the Astronomicon's control chambers, their whispers echoing against pillars carved with the names of 1,000,000 forgotten martyrs. At the heart of this labyrinth sat the High Lords of Terror, gathered in their shadowed chamber beneath banners older than most civilizations. The flicker had reached them as a whisper through their private psyches, a tremor that none dared to ignore. Lord Inquisitor Valen, his pale face half hidden behind a golden mask, stood rigid as he spoke. My lords, something has emerged from the warp. It is not a mere fluctuation, nor a random surge of empiric activity. This was focused, deliberate, an intrusion. His voice was cold, clipped, each word carefully measured to hide the unease coiling beneath. A ripple of murmurs passed among the gathered lords. The fabricator general of Mars adjusted his mechanical respirator, vox emitters crackling as he rumbled. No vessel of known design has entered our registers. No transmission precedes this disturbance. Logic dictates an anomaly. Sneered Ecclesiarch Seraphine, her voice sharp as a blade. She slammed her staff upon the marble floor, the sound ringing like a death knell. Blasphemy more likely. The Emperor's light dims not for chance. This is the work of the archenemy. Some new daemon prince has clawed its way into real space to challenge the throne. Valen's mask tilted toward her, unreadable, perhaps, or perhaps something else. Reports are fragmentary, yet compelling. A world at the edge of the segmentum obscurus has gone silent. Moments before their vox signals ceased, the planet's astropathic choir sent a final broken message. Something has come through. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The phrase hung in the air, malignant and undeniable. Lord Commander Uriel, supreme representative of the Imperial Guard, shifted uncomfortably. His battle-scarred hands gripped the pommel of his ceremonial blade. Another chaos incursion. We will do as we always do. Muster regiments. Call for Astartes, and purge the taint with fire and faith. Valen's gaze was hidden, but his tone was like ice. And if this is not chaos, if it is not merely another heretic fleet or daemon incursion, the warp's fabric was altered. I have interrogated surviving psychers. They speak of a presence, singular and vast, yet alien to our galaxy. Even the oldest records hold no mention of such a thing. The fabricator general's mechanical limbs clicked in agitation. Then it must be studied. Mechanicus. Protocols dictate examination before eradication. You require nothing, Seraphine snapped, her eyes blazing with fervor. Faith is our guide. The Emperor's will is clear. We shall burn this impurity from existence before it can spread. No study, no hesitation. Hesitation is treachery. As their argument rose, another voice emerged, low but commanding. The Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum, draped in shadows, spoke for the first time. Whether it is Daemon, Xenos, or something yet unnamed, it has dared to disturb the Emperor's domain. Its existence alone is threat enough. I propose immediate observation, and if warranted, elimination. Valen turned sharply toward him. Agreed. I have already dispatched an inquisitorial strike team to the affected world. Their orders are to confirm what has emerged, and if possible contain it. They will report back directly to me. His voice lowered, carrying a weight that silenced the chamber. But understand this. Even the act of sending them may already be too late. Whatever has come through, its influence spreads faster than we can respond. As if to punctuate his words, the Astronomican's light flickered again. The chamber trembled, dust sifting down from the vaulted ceiling. The High Lords fell silent, their expressions hidden but their fear unmistakable. Far away, on the desolate war-torn planet, Vader moved among the battered remnants of the Imperial Guard, reshaping them with his iron will. His presence grew like a shadow cast across the stars, felt by psychers who had never seen him, whispered of by cultists, who named him in the same breath as the dark gods. Already, the first seeds of legend were taking root. The commander, who had knelt before him, now served with a fanatic's devotion. His soldiers drilled mercilessly under Vader's gaze. Fear forged discipline where faith had faltered. Under Vader's command, outposts were rebuilt, defenses restored, and the scattered Imperial survivors transformed into an army of purpose. Yet Vader himself did not rest. His body still bore the strain of the warp's crossing, each movement a contest of will over weakness. Alone, beneath the shattered spires of a ruined cathedral, he knelt in silence, reaching outward with the Force. He felt the warp like an ocean of knives, chaotic and overwhelming, but beyond it, faint and distant, there was another presence. It was immense, unfathomable, a mind so vast it eclipsed the stars. Its will pressed down on the galaxy like a crushing hand. Vader could not perceive it fully, only fragments, the flicker of impossible light, the hum of machinery, older than empires, the faint echo of countless voices, screaming in unison. For a moment he felt something almost akin to recognition, not of the being itself, but of the raw, absolute authority it represented. It reminded him of the Emperor he once served, and of the master he had slain. Vader's respirator hissed, the sound harsh in the silence. Somewhere, far across the void, that great will turned ever so slightly toward him, like an unseen gaze meeting his own. Neither could perceive the other fully, yet both knew the truth. There was now another power in the galaxy, one that would not kneel. Back on Terra, deep beneath the palace, ancient machinery stirred. The Emperor's withered form remained still upon the golden throne, but the web of psychers and servitors that sustained his light trembled with strain. The attending priests fell prostrate, chanting litanies of warding and protection. One dared to lift his head, only to see the Astronomican flare with unnatural brilliance, as though in warning. The High Lords felt it too. Seraphine clutched her staff, her lips moving in frantic prayer. Valen's hand hovered near his bolt pistol. Even the Fabricator General's logic engines whirred in disarray. The chamber lights dimmed, and for one heartbeat, a single phrase echoed in every mind present, though none could say from where it came. A shadow rising, and then it was gone, leaving only silence, and the dread certainty that whatever had crossed into their galaxy was already shaping its destiny. Far away, Vader rose to his feet, his armor groaned, his breath steady and unbroken. Without looking back, he strode toward the waiting army, his mind already reaching beyond this world, to the vast empire he intended to claim. Above Terra, the stars burned cold and distant. The Emperor's light shone on, but for the first time in 10,000 years, it trembled. Night had settled across the ruined world, a night unlike any Vader had known before. The sky was a bruise of swirling black clouds, pierced by faint, unnatural lights. They were not stars. This world's heavens were wounded, its very atmosphere tainted by centuries of unending war. Firelight flickered among the skeletal remains of Manufactoria, casting jagged shadows over the broken ground, where Imperial banners hung in tatters. The silence between the gusts of wind was heavy, broken only by the distant groan of collapsing structures, and the low chant of soldiers, repeating litanies of obedience. Vader stood apart from them, his silhouette a dark obelisk against the fires. His respirator's rhythmic hiss and rasp marked time in the void. Though his body still ached from the warp's passage, he gave no outward sign of weakness. He did not need to. Fear sustained the obedience of these men far more effectively than loyalty ever could. They had begun to whisper his name in reverence and dread. Some called him savior, others monster. It made no difference. Power was not built upon the truth of what one was, only the perception of inevitability. Yet as he stood unmoving, his mind was not here. In the depths of his consciousness, memories stirred like embers fanned into flame. The cathedral ruins around him evoked too much. Broken spires reaching to a starless sky reminded him of Coruscant's towers. The smell of incense mixed with ash brought back the halls of the Jedi Temple, the last moments before it burned beneath his hand. Anakin Skywalker's ghost rose unbidden, dragging chains of guilt behind it. He saw Padme's face in the smoke, her eyes wide with betrayal as his hands closed around her throat. Luke's voice echoed through the chambers of his mind, pleading with him on the second Death Star, a plea he had silenced with violence, until it was too late. The dark side did not free him from these memories, it bound him to them, a slave to his own choices. He turned inward, closing his eyes behind the black lenses of his mask, and reached for the Force. But here, the Force was different. It was not divided into light and dark as it had been in his former galaxy. Here, it was a raging sea, red with endless slaughter, churning with the screams of billions who had died in unending war. The voices did not tempt or teach. They clawed at his mind like starving beasts. It took all his will to hold his own identity against the tide. In that maelstrom, visions came. He saw a throne wrought of gold and bone upon which sat a figure too vast to comprehend, bound by machinery and ceaseless suffering. Around it, priest kings and warriors knelt, their faith not in hope but in fear. He saw cities that were hives, teeming masses, crushed beneath cathedrals of stone and steel, and beyond them all, a galaxy in flames, consumed by war so total it seemed endless. The vision shifted. He saw himself standing amidst these burning stars, not as a stranger, but as a conqueror. Legions of soldiers clad in black marched at his command, entire worlds bending to his will. A new empire, vast beyond measure, rising beneath his hand. For a heartbeat, the vision filled him with cold satisfaction. Then the image darkened. His armies turned on one another, slaughtering without end, their banners sinking into rivers of blood. And from the heart of this empire rose a shadow vaster than his own, a shape of fire and teeth, and screaming souls. Vader's eyes snapped open, his respirator hissed violently as he tore himself from the vision. The air felt heavier, as though the very world resisted his presence. He understood now why this galaxy felt so wrong. It was not merely corrupted by war. It was a prison. Every soul he had touched through the Force was bound by invisible chains, chains of faith, of fear, of unending conflict. There was no republic to restore, no peace to strive for, only a galaxy enslaved to its own ruin. Footsteps approached cautiously from behind. It was the planetary commander, his armor dented and stained, his face pale beneath grime and exhaustion. He knelt without speaking, waiting for permission to rise. Vader gave none.
"My lord," the man began at last, voice trembling. "Our scouts have reported enemy movement to the east, chaos warbands retreating into the ash wastes. We have secured the remaining bastions and established new perimeters as you commanded." Vader turned slowly, his cape swirling like smoke. "And the civilians, those who survived?" The commander hesitated. "They have been gathered, but their faith is fragile. Many are lost to despair. Some whisper heresies. The ecclesiarchy priests demand they be purged." Vader's gaze was unreadable behind the black mask. "Purge them and you will have nothing left but corpses. Fear can be shaped, despair can be weaponized. I will give them purpose." The commander bowed lower, relief and terror mingling in his posture. "As you say, my lord." Vader dismissed him with a gesture, returning to his silent contemplation. The truth was clear now. This galaxy's rulers, these high lords, these priests, had no vision beyond survival. Their emperor was a relic, their Imperium a machine built to grind its people into ash. They had built an empire of fear, but they lacked the will to wield it fully. Vader remembered the Republic, corrupt and decaying, how the Jedi had clung to ideals even as their order rotted from within. He remembered how Sidious had offered him a new path, a vision of order through absolute control. That dream had died with the fall of his own empire. But here was a second chance. For a moment beneath the mask he almost smiled. But even as his resolve hardened, a whisper curled through the warp around him. It was not the voices of the damned that filled this galaxy, nor the echoes of his own past. This was something older, colder, and infinitely crueler. "You do not belong here," it hissed, a thought that was not sound. "Leave, or be unmade." Vader's breath deepened, the rasping mechanical sound growing louder. "I have been unmade before," he said to the darkness, "and remade. I will not leave. This galaxy is mine to command." The whisper faded, but the air seemed to grow colder in its absence. Vader knew then that whatever power ruled the warp itself had taken notice of him. It would not remain silent forever. Behind him, the camp stirred uneasily. Soldiers drilled, priests chanted, refugees wept. Above them all, the sky churned with unseen storms. Vader stood unmoving, his presence casting a shadow over them all. The chains of his past still bound him, but now he would forge them into weapons. And when the time came, he would break not only his own bonds, but those of the entire galaxy. Far away on Terra, the Astronomicon trembled once more, and a silent alarm echoed through the halls of power. The Emperor's dream had been disturbed, and a new nightmare was beginning to take shape. The ash wastes stretched endlessly to the east, a landscape of jagged ridges and broken plains where nothing lived except carrion birds and the remnants of armies long dead. Rusted tank husks jutted from the ground like skeletal monuments, and the wind carried with it a metallic tang, as if the very air had been poisoned by centuries of slaughter. It was toward this desolation that Vader marched, flanked by the battered remnants of the Imperial Guard regiment now under his command. They moved in silence, their steps heavy with exhaustion, yet no one dared falter. His presence was a yoke heavier than any weight of gear or weaponry. Above them, pale lightning rippled through bruised clouds, illuminating the twisted terrain. Vader's respirator hissed steadily, the only sound that did not falter before the oppressive silence. Each breath was like the tolling of a funeral bell, and the soldiers clung to it as if it were proof that something powerful and unbreakable led them. The commander, once doubtful and trembling, now marched with head bowed, his every order echoing Vader's will. Fear had become Scouts had reported movement in the wastes, fleeing traitor warbands, shattered remnants of the Chaos Force. Vader had broken days before, but Vader knew they were not fleeing at all. They were regrouping, preparing a counterstrike. He could feel them through the Force, each twisted mind like a burning coal in the darkness. Their hatred was palpable, a storm waiting to be unleashed. The army crested a rise and the enemy revealed itself. Across the plain, thousands of figures gathered in a tide of madness and ruin. Cultists shrieked blasphemous chants, their voices rising in a single, discordant hymn. Among them strode hulking shapes clad in Baroque, blasphemous armor, traitor, Astartes, their every movement radiating violence. The banners they bore were torn and blood-stained, marked with symbols that writhed when gazed upon for too long. The commander swallowed audibly, his courage faltering. "By the throne," he whispered. "We are outnumbered 10-1. Vader did not look at him. Numbers are irrelevant. Discipline will decide this battle. His voice was cold and absolute, cutting through the fear that gnawed at the soldier's resolve. He raised one hand. The order to advance was unspoken, yet every soldier obeyed. They moved into formation, lines forming with mechanical precision. Heavy weapons emplacements were set, tanks rumbled into position, and mortars were readied. Across the plain, the traitor host roared, a cacophony of defiance that shook the very ground. Then, as one, they surged forward. The first shots rang out. Lasfire stitched through the darkness, bright lances of crimson, cutting into the charging masses. Bolters roared in reply, each explosive shell tearing men apart in gory blossoms. the air filled with the stench of burned flesh and the sharp tang of ozone. Vader strode into the heart of the storm. His lightsaber ignited with its signature hiss, casting a bloody glow that mingled with the lightning overhead. Bolter rounds screamed toward him, but none struck true. With a flick of his hand, he bent their paths, sending them spiraling harmlessly away, or back toward their originator. The first wave of cultists crashed against the Imperial line, and the battle dissolved into chaos. Men screamed, steel clashed, and the ground turned slick with blood. Vader moved through it all, like a dark tide, his blade an extension of his will. He cut through foes with mechanical precision, each stroke fatal, each motion deliberate. Where his saber could not reach, the Force did. Bodies were hurled aside, bones shattered, weapons ripped from grasping hands, and turned against their owners. To the soldiers fighting beside him, it was as if a god of war walked among them. They rallied around him, their fear transmuted into fanatic resolve. The sight of Vader standing unbroken amidst the slaughter gave them strength they had not known they possessed. But the traitor Marines were no mere rabble. Towering over the battlefield, they carved through Imperial ranks with contemptuous ease. Their war cries drowned out the lasfire and the screams of the dying. One such giant, clad in corroded red armor, roared a challenge and charged directly at Vader, his chain axe revving hungrily. Vader met him without hesitation. The first swing of the chain axe struck like a thunderbolt, shattering the ground where Vader had stood a moment before. His saber flashed upward, parrying the second strike, the clash of weapons sending shockwaves through the air. The traitor's strength was immense, his body enhanced by ancient gene forging, but Vader's mastery of the Force equaled and surpassed it. He moved with a speed and precision that defied mortal limits, each strike probing for weakness. The traitor bellowed in fury, his movements growing wild. Vader stepped inside his guard and drove his saber through a joint in the corrupted arm. The blade burned clean through, severing limb and life alike. The Marine collapsed with a sound like falling stone, his death cry swallowed by the storm of battle. For a heartbeat, both armies froze, watching. Then the traitors howled in rage, and the Imperials roared in answer. The clash resumed with renewed ferocity. Above the plain, the warp itself seemed to shudder. Rents opened in the sky, spilling unnatural light. From these wounds in reality, daemons poured forth, their forms shifting and writhing, their laughter a cacophony of madness. The soldiers faltered, their fragile minds fraying before the sight of these horrors. Even the commander staggered back, his lips forming prayers that went unanswered. Vader stood unmoved. He had faced the nightmares of his own universe, and these were merely different masks of the same darkness. With a gesture, he sent a ripple of power through the battlefield. Daemons screamed as their forms unraveled beneath the crushing grip of his will. Those that survived rushed him, only to be swept aside like leaves before a storm. His strength burned hot and bright, but it was not infinite. He felt the strain tearing at his body, the mechanical limbs groaning, the respirator wheezing under the effort. Each movement was agony, yet he pressed on, sustained by cold determination. The traitors began to falter. Without their champions and their daemonic allies, their chaotic fervor turned to confusion. Vader seized the moment. His voice, amplified by the Force, rolled across the battlefield like thunder. Advance. Leave none standing. The Imperial Guard surged forward, their formation now a relentless machine of death. Bolters and lasfire cut down the fleeing cultists. Tanks crushed the wounded beneath their treads. By dawn, the plain was silent, save for the crackle of fires and the low moans of the dying. Vader stood at the center of the carnage, his armor scorched, his breathing harsh but steady. Around him, soldiers fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had witnessed. The commander approached, his face pale and streaked with anger. "My lord," he said hoarsely, "the enemy is destroyed. We are victorious, because of you." Vader's gaze swept over the field, taking in the countless dead, the ruined earth, the smoke that blotted out the sky. Victory was a hollow word here. This was only the beginning. "They will return," he said, his voice a mechanical growl, "and when they do, we will be ready. This world is mine now, its people, its armies, its very soil, all will serve." As he turned away, the commander bowed deeply, trembling. The soldiers echoed the motion,
their voices rising in a chant that carried across the battlefield. Far above, unseen by mortal eyes, the warp rippled. Powers older than empires stirred, their attention drawn to this singular figure who had defied them. On Terra, the Astronacon flickered once more, brighter than before. The High Lords would soon learn that their galaxy had changed forever, though whether for salvation or damnation, none could yet say. Vader walked through the smoke and ruin, his mind already reaching beyond this world. The battle was over, but his war was only beginning. The great spires of Terra rose above a churning sea of humanity, their peaks disappearing into the polluted haze that hung perpetually over the throne world. Beneath those spires, within the deepest sanctums of the Imperial Palace, the High Lords of Terra gathered once more in their vaulted chamber, where ancient banners swayed in stale air, and braziers burned incense, to mask the stench of age and fear. Outside these walls, the Imperium stretched across 1,000,000 worlds, but here, at the very heart of the galaxy, power was held by a handful of men and women, whose every word shaped the fate of humanity. The Astronacon had flickered again.
The ripple had been stronger this time, unmistakable, and with it came reports too strange to ignore. An outlying world, once merely another nameless battlefield in the endless war, now produced astropathic messages laced with terror. The fragments painted a single image, a figure wrapped in black, wielding power beyond sanctioned comprehension, and armies kneeling before him as though before a god. Lord Inquisitor Valen stood before the assembly, his golden mask gleaming in the chamber's half-light. His voice carried with icy precision, cutting through the low murmur of political maneuvering. We can no longer treat this as an isolated disturbance. The being who has appeared on that world has broken the forces of the archenemy and bent the remnants of the Astra Militarum to his will. Our inquisitorial agents confirm that survivors worship him already. If this is allowed to continue, the faith of entire sectors may shift away from the Emperor. Across from him, Ecclesiarch Seraphine gripped her staff, its top crowned with a blazing aquila. Her expression was a mask of righteous fury. Blasphemy, she spat. To even speak of such things is heresy. Whatever this creature is, it must be purged before its shadow falls across the Imperium. The faithful must be shown the Emperor's wrath, not seduced by false gods. The Fabricator General of Mars adjusted his mechanical limbs, the gears and pistons hissing softly. Logic dictates assessment before destruction, he intoned, in his flat, modulated voice. A power capable of defeating chaos with such efficiency cannot be dismissed outright. If this entity is technological in nature, perhaps it may be replicated, harnessed. We would be remiss not to study it. General Uriel, Master of the Imperial Guard, slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Study, while it raises banners over our regiment. This is no mere weapon. This is a threat to imperial unity. I have read the reports. Entire companies bend knee to this being. If even a fraction of them were to turn fully, we would face another rebellion on the scale of the Horus heresy. The chamber fell silent at the neck. Even 10,000 years later, the word Horus was spoken with caution, like a curse that might awaken old nightmares. Valen seized the moment. Precisely. We cannot afford delay or debate. My strike team has reached the world, but they dare not engage direct. They report that the being's command of psychic phenomena is unlike anything recorded. He wields destructive energies without sanctioned rites, and his mere presence breaks lesser minds. Already my agents whisper of visions and omens surrounding him. This cannot be allowed to spread. Seraphine turned on Valen, her eyes narrow. And yet you still speak of restraint. Why? Are you so blind, Inquisitor, that you would bargain with this creature instead of purging it? I speak of survival, Valen replied coldly. Our Imperium is stretched thin. Segmentum Solar is beset on every side by orcs, Tyranids and the great enemy. We are losing worlds faster than we can reinforce them. If this anomaly can be turned to our advantage, even temporarily, we may save countless lives. Murmurs rose among the lords. Some nodded reluctantly, seeing the logic in Valen's words. Others bristled at the suggestion of compromise. The chamber became a nest of serpents, each voice hissing its own agenda. In the shadows near the great doors, the Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum watched silently.
His presence was more felt than seen, a pressure on the mind that warned of death. At last, he spoke, his voice a whisper that seemed to slide between the arguments. If this being cannot be controlled, he can be eliminated, quietly, without the need for open war. My operatives have slain traitor primarchs before, they can do so again. The Fabricator General's optics whirred as they focused on the Grand Master. If elimination is chosen, we must first ensure that such action does not destabilize local defenses. The archenemy remains active in that region. Logic suggests that removing this being prematurely may strengthen chaos. General Uriel cursed under his breath. Every moment we delay, his legend grows. Soon we will not be debating a single figure, but an entire crusade of heretics united beneath him. I will not see another Warmaster rise unchecked. Valen's mask tilted slightly, his voice soft but cutting. Then perhaps we must give him that title ourselves. The chamber erupted into shouts. Seraphine's staff slammed against the floor. Heresy, utter heresy. Valen raised a hand for silence. Listen to me. If we name him Warmaster, publicly, officially, we claim his victories as our own. The masses will see him not as a rival to the Emperor, but as the Emperor's chosen instrument. We place him within our hierarchy, bind him with ceremony and duty, and if he turns against us, then the galaxy will see his rebellion as treachery, not our failure. It was a dangerous gamble, and every lord knew it. To elevate an unknown power was to invite ruin, yet to ignore him was to court chaos of a different kind. Slowly, the murmurs shifted, calculations were made, alliances formed and broken in silent glance. At last Seraphine spat bitterly. If this is to be done, it must be done swiftly. I will not allow this false idol to linger in ambiguity. Valen inclined his head, his hidden expression unreadable. Agreed. My agents will deliver the decree. The being will be summoned to a war council. There, before witnesses and scribes, he will be declared Warmaster of the Segmentum Obscurus. General Uriel's voice was a low growl. And if he refuses, then, Valen said softly, we will already have gathered the noose around his neck. Far from terror, on the world, Vader now ruled. The black-armored figure stood atop the battlements of a rebuilt fortress, his army drilled below, their chants echoing across the ruins. He felt the currents of the Force shifting, a distant tremor that spoke of unseen eyes watching him. Somewhere across the galaxy, decisions were being made that would shape his destiny. Vader's respirator hissed steadily as he turned his gaze to the stars. He did not yet know the titles they planned to bestow upon him, nor the traps hidden within them, but he felt the shape of what was coming. War, vast and inevitable. In the darkness between worlds, ships began to move, carrying emissaries and assassins alike. The High Lords had cast their dice, and the galaxy itself would bear the cost of their gamble. The great cathedral city of Icarian was a ruin long before Vader's arrival. Once a seat of worship and pilgrimage, it had been reduced to rubble by decades of bombardment and neglect, its towers shattered, its plazas filled with craters, and the broken remnants of statues venerating the God Emperor. Now, under Vader's command, scaffolds rose amid the devastation. Barracks had been erected within the hollow shells of sanctuaries, manufactoria repurposed to churn out weapons instead of devotional relics. To the common soldiers, this was rebirth. They marched with newfound precision, their banners no longer ragged, but newly forged in black and crimson. Their chants no longer spoke only of distant terror, but of their living warlord, the towering figure whose very presence inspired obedience. Yet for others, this transformation was a desecration. To the ecclesiarchy, the sight of holy structures turned to fortresses was an abomination beyond words. The sky above burned crimson as a fleet of ecclesiastical vessels descended, their hulls etched with litanies of purity, the voxnet filled with hymns and condemnations as their arrival was announced across the world. Vader stood atop the walls of his fortress, his cape billowing in the hot wind, his respirators hiss, steady and unbroken. He had felt their approach days before. The Force whispered of their intent, their righteous fury sharpened to a blade. The first to emerge was Cardinal Thane, a towering figure, clad in ornate robes of red and gold, his staff crowned with a blazing aquila. Behind him marched hundreds of fanatical priests and militant confessors, their voices raised in deafening chant. They carried relics, censers, spilling holy smoke, and the ragged remnants of imperial banners. Their eyes burned with zeal, but also with fear. Even they could not look upon Vader without trembling. "My lord," murmured the planetary commander at Vader's side, his voice tight with unease. "They come with authority from Terra itself. They demand audience." Vader's mechanical breathing filled the silence before he replied, "Let them speak. Words cannot harm me." The gates opened, and the procession entered. The contrast was stark. The black armored troops of Vader standing silent and unyielding, and the robed priests advancing with wild fervor. When they reached the great plaza before the fortress steps, Cardinal Thane raised his staff, and the chanting ceased. "By the authority of the Ecclesiarch, and the will of the Holy Synod," he thundered, his voice carrying across the square, "I speak to you, stranger and usurper. You have taken the Emperor's servants as your own. You have defiled his holy places, and you have dared to wield powers unsanctioned and profane. This cannot stand. Kneel before the throne, confess your heresy, and submit to purification, or be cast down as the enemy of all mankind." The soldiers behind Vader shifted uneasily, their faith torn between two visions of authority. Vader descended the steps slowly, his every movement deliberate. The Cardinal's fire and fury met the cold, inexorable weight of his presence. When he spoke, his voice was not raised, yet it carried with unnatural clarity. "You speak of purification," Vader said, his tone a low growl, "yet your faith has left this world in ruins. You build monuments to a distant corpse while your people starve. I have given them order, I have given them strength, and you call this heresy?" Thane's face darkened, veins standing out on his neck. "The Emperor is not a corpse. He is eternal, the divine protector of humanity. You are nothing but a shade of darkness, a deceiver like those we have burned for millennia. These men kneel to you because you have ensnared them with sorcery. Their loyalty is false." Vader took another step forward, the red glow of his lightsaber igniting with a hiss. "Their loyalty is earned through victory, through survival. Where was your Emperor when chaos descended upon this world? Where were you, Cardinal, when demons tore your churches apart and butchered your flocks? I was here. I broke the enemy. I forged these men into soldiers. They follow me because I lead, not because I hide behind prayers and The words struck like blows. Some soldiers lowered their heads, torn between the teachings of their youth and the reality before their eyes. The Cardinal saw the wavering and grew desperate. He raised his staff high, shouting, "Behold the blasphemer revealed. Look upon his weapon, his witchcraft, his defiance. He seeks to usurp the throne itself. Strike him down, faithful servants of the Emperor." The plaza erupted into chaos. Militant confessors surged forward, wielding chain swords and relic-blessed blades, while Vader's black-clad soldiers raised their rifles in defense. Las fire split the air, screams echoing beneath the vaulted ruins. Vader did not move at first. He simply extended one hand. The first rank of attackers halted mid-charge, lifted into the air by an invisible force. Bones cracked, weapons fell from nerveless fingers, and a heartbeat later they were hurled backward like rag dolls, smashing into the far wall with sickening finality. The display broke the morale of many, but Thane pressed on, his zeal undimmed. He advanced through the carnage, swinging his staff like a weapon, his voice a roar. "Daemon, you cannot stand against the Emperor's chosen. I am his voice, his fury. In his name, I condemn you." Vader met him at the center of the plaza. Their clash was not merely physical but ideological. Two visions of power colliding. Thane struck with his staff, its head glowing with holy energy. Vader's lightsaber intercepted it, the collision sending a shockwave through the square. Sparks and fire burst outward as faith and will clashed. "You serve a throne of silence," Vader said, driving Thane backwards step by step. "You kneel to a dream that has long since died. I have seen empires fall. I have built them from ash. The Emperor you worship is no master, only a prison." Thane screamed, his face contorted with rage and terror. With a final desperate swing, he channeled every prayer, every litany into one strike. Vader caught it with the force, his free hand closing in a crushing gesture. The staff shattered. Thane gasped. His body lifted helplessly into the air. Around them, the battle froze. Soldiers and priests alike stared, breathless, as Vader held the cardinal suspended. For a long moment, there was silence, save for the hiss of Vader's respirator. Then he spoke, his voice, a sentence past. "Your faith has failed you." With a flick of his wrist, Thane's neck snapped. His lifeless body crumpled to the ground. The remaining priests fell to their knees, weeping and pleading for mercy. Vader turned to his soldiers, his voice rising to a thunderous command. "The old faith is broken. The Emperor does not hear you. I hear you. I see you. Follow me, and you will have victory." The roar that followed was primal, born of fear and awe. The soldiers shouted his name, their voices drowning out the wails of the defeated ecclesiarchy. High above, unseen by mortal eyes, the psychic echo of the duel reached Terra itself. Deep within the Imperial Palace, astropaths screamed as visions of a black figure, standing over a slain cardinal burned their minds to ash. The High Lords felt it too, a tremor that shook their fragile scheme. On that blood-soaked plaza, Vader stood victorious, his shadow stretching long over kneeling masses. The duel had been more than a battle of flesh and bone. It had been a contest of belief, and for now, his belief had triumphed. But even as he claimed this victory, he felt the warp stirring. Chaos did not care who ruled or who knelt. It only hungered. Somewhere beyond the veil, the dark gods laughed, and their laughter promised that this war was far from over. Smoke still clung to the spires of Icarian days after the duel, drifting in pale veils through the ruined city like the ghost of a dead faith. The bodies of Cardinal Thane's fallen followers had been burned in vast pyres at Vader's command, their ashes scattered to the winds, so no relics could remain to inspire resistance. The plaza where the Cardinal's body had fallen was now a parade ground, filled with ranks of soldiers kneeling in precise formation beneath banners of black and crimson. Their chants no longer invoked the distant Emperor but echoed a single name, their voices rolling like thunder beneath the storm-dark sky. Vader stood at the head of the assembly, his towering form silent and immovable. His respirator's rhythmic hiss was lost beneath the unified roar of thousands proclaiming allegiance. He did not bask in their adoration, for it meant little to him. This was not worship, it was order, a tool, but he knew its power. The ecclesiarchy's hold had been broken here, and in the vacuum, he had planted something far stronger. Fear and awe bound these men to him, more securely than faith ever had. Yet even as he looked over the army he had forged, Vader's thoughts were elsewhere. Across the void he could feel the galaxy shifting. The duel's psychic echo had not faded into nothing. It had spread like wildfire, carried along the warp currents, until it reached even the distant throne of Terra. The High Lords had felt it, and they would act. He had felt their scrutiny for days now, a distant pressure like a cold blade resting against the back of his mind. The planetary commander approached, falling to one knee before speaking. His voice was low, cautious. "My lord, scouts report Imperial ships inbound. They bear the sigils of Segmentum Command, and the High Lords themselves. Their arrival is imminent." Vader's mask turned slightly, the faint gleam of crimson lenses, betraying no emotion. "As expected," he said, his voice the unyielding growl of machinery. "They come to bind me with their chains. They believe titles will control me." The commander swallowed hard. "They bring honor, my lord, perhaps recognition of your victory. If they name you Warmaster, titles are hollow." Vader cut in, the hiss of his respirator harsh in the pause. "But the perception they create is not. They will seek to claim what I have built as their own, to make it a symbol of their power. They do not understand that symbols mean nothing to me." The commander bowed lower, his words barely a whisper. "What do you wish of me?" "Prepare the men," Vader said. "They will kneel when commanded, and they will stand when ordered, nothing more." When the fleet arrived it blotted out the sun. Massive battleships descended through the clouds, their hulls carved with Gothic spires, and covered in prayer scripts, each vessel a cathedral of war. Vox hymns filled the skies proclaiming the glory of the Emperor, and the unity of his Imperium. From the flagship descended a delegation of the Imperium's highest representatives, Inquisitors, robed in black and gold, Space Marine, honor guards, gleaming in their ceramite armor, and at their head, a robed Lord Admiral, whose presence carried the weight of entire star systems. Behind them, scribes scuttled like insects, ready to record every word for the archives of the Adeptus Administratum. The procession advanced through the plaza, flanked on both sides by Vader's black-clad legions. The tension was suffocating. The Imperials looked upon Vader's forces with barely concealed revulsion. They saw heresy in every banner, every altered litany, every silence, where a hymn to the Emperor should have been sung. The soldiers of Icarian stared back with equal contempt, seeing in these newcomers the weakness of an old and crumbling order. The Lord Admiral stopped at the foot of the steps where Vader waited. His voice was loud, ringing with ceremonial authority. By the decree of the High Lords of Terror, by the will of the Emperor himself, we come to recognize your deeds and victories. You have broken the forces of the archenemy, where others faltered. You have united the scattered regiments of this sector. Such power cannot remain without sanction. He gestured, and a scribe stepped forward, unrolling a scroll that stretched nearly to the ground. The words upon it were ancient, written in High Gothic so formal it was almost a dead tongue. The scribe's trembling voice intoned the proclamation. In recognition of these victories, and in service to the eternal Imperium of Man, we name you Warmaster of Segmentum Obscurus. All forces within this command shall fall under your authority. You shall march in the Emperor's name and bear his light into the darkness.
The final words echoed across the plaza. The soldiers below erupted into chants of victory, their cries mingling with the formal hymns of the delegation. The scribes scribbled furiously, recording the moment for posterity. Vader remained silent. The title meant nothing to him, yet he understood its value. As Warmaster he would gain command, not just of this world, but of entire fleets and legions. The High Lords believed they were binding him within their hierarchy, making him a servant of their ancient machine. In truth, they were giving him the tools to seize the galaxy itself. Slowly, he raised his hand. The plaza fell silent. His voice rolled out like thunder, amplified by the Force, until it seemed to come from the very sky. "I accept this title," he said. "I accept it not as a servant, but as a master of war. Under my command, there will be no retreat, no surrender. Chaos will be crushed. The enemies of humanity will burn, and those who stand in the way of victory, be they traitor, Xenos, or false priest, will fall." The soldiers roared their approval, a single unified voice that shook the plaza. Even some among the delegation flinched at the raw fervor in that cry. The Lord Admiral's face was pale beneath his veneer of formality, but he forced a smile. "The Imperium is strong once more," he declared, but Vader could feel their unease through the Force. The Inquisitors whispered behind their masks, already plotting contingencies. They had come to elevate him, but also to measure him, to weigh his loyalty against the threat he posed. Later, in the privacy of his war chamber, Vader stood over a massive hololithic display of the galaxy. Red markers glowed across its surface, each representing a world under siege by Chaos or Xenos forces. The scale of the war was staggering even to him. 1,000,000 battlefronts, 1,000,000 cries for aid. The Imperium was drowning. The planetary commander stood at his side, reverent and silent. Vader did not look at him as he spoke. "These fools believe they have given me power. They do not see that they have merely exposed their weakness." His gloved hand swept over the hololith, extinguishing dozens of red markers at once. "I will bring order to this galaxy, not for their emperor, but for my will alone." The commander dared to glance at him. "And if the High Lords oppose you, my lord?" Vader's respirator hissed, his answer as cold and final as a blade drawn in the dark. "Then they will fall with the rest." Outside, the fleet's engines thundered, preparing for war. Across the galaxy, Imperial regiments received new orders bearing Vader's seal. Entire crusades began to move, countless ships shifting toward new battlefronts. To the common soldier, this was salvation. To the High Lords, it was control. To Vader, it was only the first step. In the shadows of the warp, unseen by mortal eyes, the dark gods stirred. They had felt this rise of power and recognized it for what it was, a challenge. Soon they would send champions to test the new Warmaster. Soon the true war would begin. In the silent depths of the warp, reality twisted and screamed. Where the material realm obeyed the rigid laws of physics, here only will and madness held sway. Shapes without form drifted like predators in the void, their whispers echoing through the thoughts of mortals far away. In that endless storm of nightmares, a ripple spread outward, a disturbance that was not born of the warp, but intruded upon it. The gods of chaos felt it immediately. The first to stir was Khorne, whose laughter rolled like a river of blood through the void. A figure had risen in the material realm, one who slaughtered with unmatched precision yet did not kneel to him. The blood god's fury was as great as his delight. Sitinch watched in silence, his many schemes briefly disrupted by this anomaly, already weaving new threads to ensnare it. Nurgle chuckled deep within his garden of decay, sensing a challenge to his slow, inevitable rot. Slanesh simply shivered in pleasure at the fear and ambition radiating from this new actor on the galactic stage, and so they turned their attention, as one toward the black-armored figure now named Warmaster. Their whispers reached their mortal servants, the traitor legions that had once followed Horus himself into rebellion. Across 1,000 war zones, Chaos warlords heard the call. On a daemon world deep within the Eye of Terror, the ground itself shifted as a monstrous figure rose from a throne of fused bone and iron. Lord Caraxes of the Black Legion, a warlord of terrifying renown, gazed into the shifting warp fires that danced before him. His crimson eyes reflected the image of Vader standing over kneeling Imperial soldiers, the very vision that had spread through the warp like a contagious thought. "This one dares to take the title of Warmaster," Caraxes growled, his voice like grinding stone. His lieutenants knelt, each a hulking giant clad in corrupted ceramite. Horus was Warmaster. None may claim that mantle while Abaddon lives. One of his champions spoke, daring to meet his gaze. "Perhaps, my lord, this is a weapon of the false emperor, a puppet sent to draw our eyes away from the true war." Caraxes considered this, then shook his massive head. "No, there is no hand of terror in this. This Vader is something else. His power is alien. Even the warp recoils from it." His gauntleted fist slammed down, sending cracks through the living floor. "Whether he serves chaos or defies it, none may rise without being tested. Ready the fleet, we march to war." In the material realm, Vader's crusade had already begun to spread. Entire sectors rallied to his banner, not because they understood his vision, but because he brought victory where before there had only been despair. Worlds long abandoned by the Imperium were liberated under his command, their people kneeling to a new symbol of strength. Vader moved among these campaigns like a shadow, never staying long in one place, always driving his forces forward. His war councils were terse affairs, his strategies unfolding with ruthless efficiency. Under his command, regiments that had been broken and scattered became instruments of precise destruction. Even the Space Marine chapters, assigned to his crusade, proud and disdainful, found themselves following his orders without realizing when obedience had become habit. Yet Vader sensed the change in the air. His victories were too swift, too complete. The enemy was adapting. Through the Force, he felt distant ripples of intent, cold and malevolent. Something was coming for him. The first sign arrived in the form of an intercepted Vox transmission. A patrol fleet near the Maelstrom reported a sudden ambush by forces of unknown strength. Their final message was cut short by screams and static, but a single word was clear: Black Legion. Vader stood in silence as the message played, his respirator's steady hiss the only sound in the chamber. Around him, officers shifted uneasily. The planetary commander, now his most trusted subordinate, broke the silence. "My lord, if the Black Legion moves against us, this changes everything. These are the same warriors who once served Horus himself. Their strength rivals entire sectors." Vader's mask turned slowly toward him.
They are traitors. They will be destroyed. His tone carried no emotion, only inevitability. Still, unease lingered. The commander lowered his voice. Reports speak of a champion among them, a warlord named Caraxes. They say he is second only to Abaddon himself. If he challenges you directly, Vader cut him off with a single gesture, then he will fall. As if summoned by those words, the challenge came days later. A massive Chaos fleet tore from the warp near the world of Therum IV, a planet newly brought under Vader's banner. The sky ignited as void shields shattered, and orbital defenses burned. Imperial forces scrambled to respond, but the enemy descended with overwhelming speed, drop pods slamming into the surface like meteors. The battle began before dawn, and by midday the capital was a maelstrom of fire and blood. Vader entered the fray personally. His presence galvanized his forces, turning retreat into relentless advance. Where he walked, Chaos forces broke. His lightsaber was a crimson arc of inevitability, his mastery of the Force tearing apart daemon and traitor alike. Even the corrupted war machines of the enemy faltered before his power. But then the tide shifted. From the heart of the enemy lines, Caraxes himself appeared, a towering figure clad in blackened armor, engraved with the Eye of Horus. His weapon was a massive daemon axe that screamed with the souls bound within it. With a roar that shook the battlefield, he pointed the weapon at Vader. "Pretender," Caraxes bellowed. "You dare to claim Horus's title, you dare to stand where the despoiler himself reigned. Come then, and be unmade." The two armies seemed to freeze as the challenge echoed across the plain. Vader advanced without hesitation, his cape trailing smoke, his saber humming to life. When they met, the clash of their weapons was like the meeting of God. The daemon axe struck with the fury of the warp itself, but Vader's blade turned it aside, his movements precise and unrelenting. Caraxes fought with brute strength and savage hatred, each blow shaking the ground. Vader met him with cold efficiency, his mastery of the Force augmenting his every strike. They moved through the battlefield like a storm, soldiers on both sides giving way before them. At last Caraxes overextended, roaring his hatred, as he swung for Vader's head. Vader stepped inside the arc of the blow, and thrust his saber deep into a gap in the corrupted armor. The blade burned through flesh and soul alike. Caraxes staggered, his massive form collapsing to its knees. Vader's mechanical breathing filled the silence as he spoke. "You are nothing. Your war, your gods, your rebellion all ashes." With a final motion, he decapitated the warlord. For a heartbeat, the battlefield was utterly still. Then the Chaos forces howled, some in fury, others in terror. Without their leader, their cohesion crumbled. Vader's forces surged forward, cutting them down and driving the survivors into the wastes. When the battle ended, the plain was a graveyard of burning machines and broken bodies. Vader stood alone amid the carnage, his black armor scorched but unbowed. His soldiers knelt, their voices rising in a chant that drowned out the screams of the dying. Far across the galaxy, in the Eye of Terror, the dark gods felt the death of their champion. Their rage was a storm that shook the warp itself. Abaddon, the despoiler, master of the Black Legion, opened his eyes and smiled coldly. A new player had entered the great game, one bold enough to strike at his chosen. Vader looked to the horizon, sensing that same gaze upon him. His war had drawn the attention of the galaxy's greatest enemy. The next move would come soon, and it would decide the fate of far more than a single world. The fires of Therum IV had not yet faded when Vader stood aboard his flagship, the Imperius Noctis, gazing through the viewing port at the void beyond. The stars were cold and distant, but Vader's thoughts were elsewhere. The battle with Caraxes had been decisive, yet victory brought him no satisfaction. The Force whispered unease, like a dark current pulling at the edges of his perception. The death of the Chaos Warlord was not an end, only a signal. Something vast and terrible now regarded him directly, a gaze that pierced not through the material realm, but through the warp itself. The ship was silent, save for the hum of its engines, and the distant chanting of its tech priests in their cathedrals of machinery. In the war room behind him, hollow projectors flickered with tactical maps of the sector, showing worlds recently brought under his banner. Red icons marked enemy positions, splinters of chaos forces, regrouping after their defeat, tendrils of Xenos incursions, pressing at the periphery. The scale of the war was staggering, even to him. Yet Vader's mind was not on strategy tonight. It was on the storm he felt approach. The planetary commander entered quietly, his boots ringing against the deck plates. He knelt before speaking. "My lord, the High Lord's emissaries have sent new orders. They call for consolidation of our gains and defensive fortifications until reinforcements arrive from Segmentum Command." Vader did not turn. His respirator hissed, filling the pause with its steady rhythm. Defensive war is stagnation. Stagnation is death. They would see us wait while our enemies gather strength. His voice was cold, cutting through the dim chamber like a blade. "No, we strike first. The Black Legion will not recover while I hold this title." The commander hesitated, then lowered his head. "As you command, Warmaster." He rose to leave, but Vader's hand lifted slightly, halting him. "There is more," Vader said. "You feel it, do you not? The unease among the men, the silence before battle, that is too deep, too unnatural." The commander's face paled. "Whispers, my lord. Dreams that spread like contagion, entire squads reporting visions of shapes, voices, speaking in tongues no man can understand. Some soldiers have taken to carving symbols into their armor, symbols they cannot explain." He swallowed hard. "I have ordered summary executions, but the corruption spreads faster than we can cut it away." Vader turned then, his black mask catching the cold light. "This is no mere morale failure. It is the warp pressing against the veil. The enemy seeks to strike not only at our flesh, but at our minds." His words seemed to chill the air itself. The commander bowed deeply and withdrew, leaving Vader alone with his thoughts. Later, in the solitude of his meditation chamber, Vader sat upon the obsidian platform at its center. The walls were unadorned, save for the faint glow of runes etched by the tech priests, to shield against psychic intrusion. Here, he reached out with the Force, extending his senses beyond the material plane. The warp surged against him like a storm. It was a sea of howling madness, its currents alive with hunger. For a moment, he saw flashes of impossible vistas, a garden of rotting splendor, a throne of skulls towering over an ocean of blood, a labyrinth of shifting crystal towers, and a realm of endless suffocating pleasure. The voices came next, countless and clamoring, each promising power, each demanding fealty. Vader did not answer. His will was an iron bastion, his mind a fortress built from pain and discipline. Yet even he could feel the temptation woven into those voices. They did not speak only to his ambition, but to the wounds he carried. He saw Padme's face, her eyes filled with sorrow. He heard Luke's voice calling to him, filled with hope he had crushed. The warp dredged these memories up like weapons, hurling them against him. "You seek to bend me," Vader said aloud, his voice a low growl in the darkness. "But I have already been broken. There is nothing you can offer that I do not already command." The visions shift. The four powers of chaos revealed themselves not fully, but as aspects: Khorne's rage, Tsinkhot's cunning, Nurgle's decay, Slaanesh's temptation. They circled him like predators, testing his defenses. Then they spoke as one, their voices merging into a single thought that reverberated through the warp. "You are not of this galaxy. You are a fracture, a wound. You will serve us, or you will be consumed." Vader's respirator hissed. "Unbroken, I serve nothing. I rule." The warp screamed in fury. The chamber's runes flared, struggling to contain the psychic backlash. Vader's body convulsed as he was dragged deeper into the vision, beyond his control.
He saw the future, imperial cities burning beneath banners of chaos, fleets shattered and scattered, and himself standing alone against a tide of daemons. Then the image shifted, and he saw himself upon a throne of black iron, the galaxy kneeling before him not in worship, but in terror. For an instant he hesitated, then he tore himself free with a roar, the vision shattering like glass. The chamber's lights flickered, and smoke curled from the runes etched into the floor. Vader fell to one knee, his breath ragged but steady. When he rose, his resolve was sharper than ever. The warp was not merely an enemy, it was a battlefield he must master. If he could bend it to his will, he would have a weapon greater than any fleet or army. But if he faltered, even for a moment, it would devour him as it had devoured countless champions before. His meditations were interrupted by a shudder that rippled through the ship. Alarms blared, the Voxnet crackled with frantic voices. Unscheduled warp emergence, enemy fleet inbound. They're not showing on augers, my lord. They static consumed the transmission, followed by a scream that cut off abruptly. Vader strode from the chamber, cape billowing behind him. The corridors were filled with soldiers rushing to battle stations, their faces pale beneath their helmets. Through the viewports, the void twisted unnaturally as massive chaos vessels tore through reality. They did not simply arrive, they clawed their way into existence, leaving trails of madness in their wake. The largest of them was a grotesque parody of an Imperial battleship, its hull covered in pulsating flesh and jagged spires. Upon its prow stood a figure shrouded in shadows, a champion of the dark gods sent to replace Caraxes. Even at this distance, Vader felt the weight of its presence pressing against his mind. He reached the command deck and took his place at the center, his voice cutting through the chaos. All batteries, fire at will. Launch fighters, prepare for boarding action. The bridge crew obeyed instantly, their terror momentarily overridden by his absolute command. Outside, the void lit with the fury of battle. Lances and torpedoes streaked between ships, tearing holes in reality itself. As the battle raged, Vader closed his eyes briefly, extending his senses once more. The enemy was not merely attacking through ships and weapons, they were striking through the warp itself, twisting the perceptions of his men, turning allies into enemies with whispered lies. He felt soldiers succumbing to madness, their screams echoing through the force. Vader clenched his fist. Enough. He reached deep into the darkness, drawing upon every fragment of his pain and rage. The force surged outward in a shockwave that rippled through the ship, cutting through the warp's influence like a blade. The whispers faltered, the daemons recoiling. The respite was brief. A massive impact shook the ship as boarding claws tore through the hull. Vader turned toward the breach, his lightsaber igniting with a snap hiss. "Let them come," he said, his voice like the tolling of a funeral bell. As the first wave of Chaos warriors stormed through, Vader met them head-on. His saber was a crimson arc of death, his will an impenetrable wall. The corridors became a slaughterhouse as he drove the enemy back step by step. Yet even as he fought, he felt the shadow beyond the shadow, a presence watching from the depths of the warp. This battle was not the true conflict, it was a message, a warning. The dark gods had shown him their hand, and now the game had truly begun. And far away, in the black heart of the Eye of Terror, Abaddon the Despoiler opened his gauntleted hand, and let a single piece fall upon the board of war. A piece shaped like a man in black armor, and a galaxy trembling between them. The void burned with war. From the viewing deck of the Imperius Noctis, Vader watched as his fleet spread across the darkness like a fan of black steel. Hundreds of ships, each a cathedral of war, moved with silent precision. Their hulls bore his sigil now, replacing the fractured symbols of 1,000 scattered regiments. This was no longer a mere crusade, it was an empire in motion. But today, even this armada felt fragile against what lay ahead. The black sun was not a star though it had once been. Long ago some cataclysmic ritual had shattered it, leaving behind a swirling sphere of blackened energy suspended above a dead system. The traitor legions had claimed this place as a fortress, turning its orbiting worlds into bastions of horror and corruption. It was here the new champion of the dark gods had chosen to make his stand, drawing countless warbands to him like carrion birds to a corpse. Vader's mechanical breath filled the silence of the command deck. His hands rested on the railing, unmoving, as the massive hololith displayed enemy formations. The planetary commander stood at his side, pale with tension. "The enemy has entrenched themselves across 3 orbital platforms, my lord," he reported, each bristling with lance batteries and void shields. "A direct assault will be costly. All war is costly," Vader replied, his voice flat and implacable. "Cost means nothing if victory is absolute." He gestured, and the hololith shifted to display the final objective, the Black Sun's core, a vast orbital citadel, shaped like a blasphemous cathedral. Spires jutted from its surface like the fangs of some colossal beast,
and its hull was etched with runes that glimmered sickly in the void. At its heart, the enemy warlord waited, a figure who had not revealed himself since Caraxus's death, but whose presence Vader could feel pressing against the edges of his mind like a predator, testing a cage. Vader knew this battle was not merely strategic, it was symbolic. The enemy sought to challenge his claim as Warmaster, before the eyes of the galaxy. If he faltered here, his forces would fracture, his newly forged empire crumbling into dust. As the fleets closed, the darkness of the void erupted into blinding light. Chaos vessels surged forward, their twisted hulls adorned with the screaming faces of the damned. Imperial lances answered, piercing through the madness with disciplined volleys. The battle began as a storm of fire and shadow, the void filled with streaking torpedoes and the blinding flash of detonations. Vader's fleet advanced in perfect formation, his voice, amplified through Vox and the Force alike, guided their movements with unerring precision. Even amidst the carnage, there was a terrible harmony to his command, each ship a note in a symphony of destruction. "Hold the line," Vader intoned, his words steady, even as explosions rattled the deck beneath him. "Their chaos is their weakness. We bring order." The first orbital platform loomed ahead, a spire-laden monstrosity pouring fire into his ranks. Strike cruisers and frigates broke away, their launch bays disgorging waves of drop pods and thunderhawk. Space Marine chapters under Vader's banner plunged into the storm, their voices raised in battle hymns as they slammed into the platform's surface. Through the Force, Vader felt their progress. Bolter fire rattled through blood-slick corridors, chain swords roared. The defenders fought like rabid animals, each death feeding the warp's hunger. But the Imperials pressed on, their will bolstered by the silent, inexorable presence of their Warmaster. The second platform fell in similar fashion, though at greater cost. Reports of daemon manifestations increased as the battle raged, warp rifts tearing open mid-combat to vomit forth abominations of flesh and shadow. Entire squads were annihilated before they could fire a shot. Vader directed his reserves with surgical precision, his mind spanning the battlefield like a web. He did not merely command, he was the battle itself, every movement part of his design. But even as victory seemed within reach, the enemy revealed their true hand. From the shadow of the Black Sun's core, massive warships emerged, hidden reserves that had waited until the moment of maximum chaos to strike. Their arrival split the void wide open. Imperial vessels reeled as new lance batteries cut through their flank. The battle lines buckled, formation crumbling under the sudden assault. On the command deck, alarms screamed. The planetary commander gripped the railing. "My lord, our left flank is collapsing. If they break through there, they'll cut the fleet in half." Vader's mask turned toward him, the crimson glow of his lenses, unwavering. "Reinforce with all reserves. Redirect strike groups to intercept." "It won't be enough," the commander protested, desperation edging his voice. "We need to fall back, regroup." "No." Vader's voice was absolute, brooking no argument. "There is no retreat. We hold, or we are lost." As the commander relayed the orders, Vader extended his senses into the chaos beyond. He felt the will of the enemy warlord, like a blade against his own, a will steeped in madness and ambition, commanding the traitor legions with the same iron certainty Vader himself wielded. The battle was not merely a clash of ships and soldiers, it was a duel of mind. Closing his eyes, Vader reached into the Force, amplifying his presence. Across the fleet, soldiers felt his will as a physical force, steadying trembling hands, banishing fear. His voice echoed in their minds. "Fight, do not yield. This day you are my blade. Cut them down." The effect was immediate. The collapsing flank rallied, formations reforming under his invisible guidance. Imperial ships surged forward once more, their fire coordinated with perfect precision. The enemy warlord reacted, pushing harder, committing his reserves to a brutal boarding assault. Drop pods rained down upon Vader's flagship, tearing through the void shields and embedding deep within its hull. Alarms blared as bulkheads sealed and internal defenses activated. Vader did not wait for the enemy to come to him. He strode through the smoke-filled corridors, lightsaber igniting with a hiss. His presence was a storm of fear and death. Chaos warriors poured from their pods, mutated and screaming, but none could stand before him. Limbs, and torsos fell in clean, smoking cut. Bolter shells detonated harmlessly in the air, as he deflected them with contemptuous ease. Step by step he drove the invaders back toward their landing zones. Behind him, his elite guard followed, their black armor stark against the red glow of emergency light. Even among the horrors of the warp, Vader was something other, something greater. The enemy faltered, their zeal breaking under the crushing weight of his will. At last, Vader reached the core of the breach, where the enemy's champion awaited. The figure was massive, clad in Baroque armor, writhing with demonic faces. His weapon was a glaive wreathed in fire, his voice a guttural growl amplified by the warp. "You dare to claim dominion here, false Warmaster," the champion spat. "Your empire is a lie. The true gods rule, and they have sent me to unmake you." Vader said nothing, his blade ignited, casting a crimson glow across the chamber. The two warriors clashed with a sound, like the cracking of worlds. The champion struck with savage strength, his blows fueled by the raw power of the warp. Vader met him with precise, unrelenting counters, each motion an extension of his iron will. The fight raged through the corridor, shattering bulkheads and scattering debris. At last, Vader caught the champion's glaive in a lock and drove his saber through the creature's chest. "You serve shadows," Vader said, his voice like the tolling of a great bell. "I am reality." The champion's body fell, lifeless, and the surviving Chaos Warriors broke, their morale shattered. Even as victory bloomed, Vader felt the enemy warlord's presence withdraw from the battlefield. The fleets of Chaos began to scatter, retreating into the warp. The Black Sun's defenses faltered. The tide had turned. Hours later, as the last enemy vessels fled, Vader stood at the viewport once more. The Black Sun burned in the distance, its twisted form unraveling as Imperial forces claimed its orbit. Around him, officers cheered, their voices exultant. But Vader's respirator hissed steadily, unchanging. He did not feel triumph, only inevitability. This was not the end. This was a message to Abaddon, to the Dark Gods, to the High Lords themselves. He had seized victory here, at the edge of damnation. The galaxy had witnessed his strength, and now, all would know the truth. There was only one Warmaster, and he would kneel to no one. The halls of the Imperial Palace were vast beyond comprehension, a labyrinth of towering arches, endless corridors, and chambers so immense they could contain entire cities. Within these ancient walls, history weighed upon every stone, like the breath of a slumbering god. Here, at the heart of the Imperium, the light of the Astronomicon pulsed faintly through the warp, guiding fleets and armies across the void. It was here that Vader, Warmaster of the Segmentum Obscurus, had been summoned, not as a conqueror, but as a guest beneath watchful eyes.
His fleet had anchored above Terra days earlier, their black and crimson banners stark against the pale glow of the throne world. Countless ships filled the orbitals like a second sky, their presence both a warning and a promise. The High Lords had welcomed him with ceremonial speeches, their words dripping with false reverence. They praised his victories, lauded his unification of scattered regiments, and spoke of his triumph over the traitor legions at the Black Sun. Their voices echoed in vast amphitheaters, carefully crafted performances for the masses who saw only the surface of things. But Vader had felt the truth beneath their words. Through the Force, he sensed their fear, sharp and acrid. Behind their masks of politeness, the High Lords whispered and plotted like carrion birds circling a lion. They had given him the title of Warmaster, but they had never meant to let him wield it freely. Terra's rulers tolerated no power they could not control. He had expected this. He had come to Terra not for their approval, but to see who among them would dare move against him. The War Council convened in a chamber beneath the throne itself, a place of ancient grandeur and suffocating ritual. Great marble pillars stretched into darkness above, and the floor was inlaid with sigils so old, their meaning had been lost to all but the most fanatical scholars. The air was heavy with incense and the metallic tang of recirculated atmosphere. Around the obsidian table stood the High Lords and their retainers. Inquisitors in black and gold, generals of the Astra Militarum, the Fabricator General of Mars, the Ecclesiarch herself, all gathered in a fragile circle of power. Vader entered without bowing, his heavy steps echoing in the silence. His respirator's rhythmic hiss seemed to mock the litanies muttered under trembling breaths. The crimson glow of his lenses swept over them, stripping away their pretense. Warmaster Vader, the Lord Commander, began, his voice carefully neutral. You honor us with your presence. The Imperium owes you much. Entire sectors have been saved through your campaigns. The black sun burns because of your strength. And yet, his words faltered, and Valen, the masked Lord Inquisitor, stepped forward smoothly. And yet the Imperium faces unrest. Valen continued. Your methods, while effective, are unconventional. There are whispers among the faithful. Some question whether your victories are achieved through the Emperor's light or through darker means. The Ecclesiarch's staff struck the floor with a resounding crack. There are no whispers, Inquisitor. There are outcries. This creature desecrates our shrines, supplants our faith, and claims the loyalty of the people for himself. This is heresy writ large, no matter how gilded its victories. The chamber erupted into argument. Generals shouted over priests, Mechanicus representatives bickered in metallic tones, and scribes frantically recorded every word. Amid the chaos, Vader stood unmoving, his presence a shadow that silenced the clamor wherever his gaze fell. At last he spoke, his voice cutting through the noise like the edge of a blade. You summoned me to speak of victories, Vader said, his tone cold and absolute. I have given you worlds reclaimed from the enemy. I have broken the legions of chaos where your armies failed. You rule from a throne of ash, blind to the fires consuming your realm. Without me there would be nothing left to govern. The silence that followed was sharp as a drawn sword. Some among the council lowered their eyes, others bristled with anger. The Ecclesiarch's lips curled in fury. You dare speak so in this sacred place? You think yourself a savior? You are nothing but a tyrant, who would replace the Emperor's will with your own. Vader's respirator hissed, his reply slow and deliberate. The Emperor's silent, his throne gathers dust while your enemies grow stronger. I am not your savior, Ecclesiarch. I am your only hope. The chamber shook with the weight of his words. Even those who hated him could not deny the truth of them. But truth had never been enough to protect a man from politics. Valen's voice was calm, too calm. Then perhaps, Warmaster, we should speak plainly. You command vast fleets and legions. You have won victories none can dispute. But power must serve a higher purpose. Will you submit to Terra's authority and bind your forces to the High Lord's will, or will you place yourself above the Imperium itself? It was the question they had been building toward since the moment he arrived, a trap woven from ceremony and law. Vader's silence was answer enough. He did not move, but through the force his refusal radiated like a storm. In that moment, the council realized he would never kneel. Valen gave the signal. From hidden alcoves around the chamber, assassins emerged. Silent, swift, armed with weapons designed to kill even the mightiest of foes. Sniper beams converged on Vader's chest plate. Power fields hummed as Eversor assassins sprang forward, their bodies built for slaughter. The first shot struck and shattered against an invisible barrier. Vader's hand rose, fingers closing into a fist. The nearest assassin was lifted screaming into the air, his bones crushed to pulp before he could fire again. Chaos erupted. Generals dove for cover. The Ecclesiarch shrieked prayers as her guards died around her. Vader moved through the storm with lethal grace. His saber ignited, crimson light bathing the chamber in a hellish glow. Every motion was precise, inevitable. Assassins fell one by one, torn apart by the force or cleaved in two by his blade. Their weapons were useless against him, their numbers meaningless. In the confusion, Valen retreated toward a side passage, his mask unreadable. Vader's voice thundered over the din. Treachery, he declared. Even here, at the heart of your Imperium, you destroy yourselves. The surviving High Lords froze, terror locking them in place. Vader's gaze swept over them like a scythe. You would rather kill me than face the true enemy. You are unfit to rule. With a gesture, he tore the chamber doors from their hinges. Imperial guards flooded in, loyal to the Warmaster. Weapons raised. The balance of power shifted in an instant. Those who had plotted against him now stood exposed and helpless.
The ecclesiarch dropped to her knees, trembling. "Please," she begged, "the Emperor's light." "The Emperor's light is gone," Vader said, his tone final. "Only mine remain." Outside, Terra's skies burned with the glow of mobilizing fleets. The news would spread quickly. The Warmaster had survived an assassination attempt by Terra's own rulers. Some would call him traitor, others, savior. Across the galaxy, loyalties would shift like sand in a storm. As Vader strode from the blood-streaked chamber, his cape swirling behind him, he knew what must come next. The Imperium would not be mended with words or titles. It would be reforged in war. Far above the throne world, the Astronomicon flickered once more, its light trembling like a candle before a storm. And in the warp beyond, dark gods laughed, for they saw a pattern repeating itself, a galaxy poised on the brink, and a new Warmaster rising from the shadows. The vaults beneath the Imperial Palace were older than memory, older than the Imperium itself. Carved from black stone and reinforced with adamantium veins, they stretched deep into the bones of Terra, a labyrinth of shadows and echoes. Few living souls had ever walked these passages, and fewer still returned. Here lay the hidden machinery that sustained the Astronomicon, the ancient conduits through which the Emperor's failing light was kept alive. Vader descended into this darkness with purpose, his cloak trailing behind him like a shadow given form. Around him marched a hand-picked cadre of his most loyal troops, their black and crimson armor silent as they advanced. They did not speak, even their breathing seemed subdued, as though sound itself feared to linger here. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, until frost gathered on the walls like the breath of ghosts. Above, Terra seethed with chaos. News of the betrayal had spread faster than fire through dry grass. Some hailed Vader as the savior of the Imperium, the only figure strong enough to cut through centuries of stagnation. Others denounced him as a tyrant who had murdered the High Lords to seize power. Fleets clashed in low orbit, armies moved through the streets. The throne world itself trembled beneath the weight of a war that had begun in a single room, and now threatened to consume the galaxy. Vader cared nothing for the cries above. His attention was fixed on what lay below. The assassination attempt had revealed much, but there had been another presence in that chamber, subtle yet undeniable, a mind not aligned with the cowardice of the High Lords, nor the madness of the dark gods, a mind that had watched, measured, and then withdrawn into these vaults. Vader intended to confront it directly. The passages narrowed as they descended. Ancient wards glimmered faintly on the walls, etched into the very stone. They pulsed with a strange rhythm, neither fully alive nor entirely inert. Through the Force, Vader felt their power, a constant thrum that pressed against his senses. It was old, older than the Imperium, older even than his own galaxy. These were not defenses against intruders, they were chains, holding something vast and terrible at bay. At last the tunnels opened into a vast subterranean chamber. It was a cathedral turned inside out, its spires inverted, and reaching downward into an abyss that seemed bottomless. In the center stood a single figure, clad in silvered armor, etched with wards of purity. A massive halberd rested in his gauntleted hands, its blade glowing faintly with blue fire. His presence radiated authority and absolute certainty. Vader recognized him at once from the whispered reports. A Grand Master of the Grey Knights, the Emperor's most secret and sacred warriors. These were not mere space marines. They were weapons forged to battle the warp itself. Their very existence was a secret so closely guarded that even the High Lords feared to speak of them. The Grand Master's voice was calm, resonant, carrying across the chamber without need of amplification. "Warmaster Vader," he said, each syllable weighted like a verdict. "Your strength is undeniable, your victories are carved into the stars themselves, but you have crossed a line from which there is no return. You stand beneath the throne of the Master of Mankind, and you bring with you the taint of the warp." Vader's respirator hissed, his reply slow and deliberate. "The warp does not command me, I command it. I have broken the servants of chaos where your kind falter." The Grand Master's helm tilted slightly, the gesture both measured and mournful. That is the lie they all tell. Every traitor Primarch, every fallen champion, Horus himself, believed he could master the darkness. They all believed the same, and they all fell. You will be no different. With a gesture, Vader signaled his troops to remain at the perimeter. This duel would be his alone. He descended the final steps into the chamber's heart, his crimson blade igniting with a hiss that echoed like a predator's breath. The Grand Master raised his halberd in silent reply. They came together in a clash that shook the vault. Sparks erupted as blade met blade, each strike heavy with intent. The Grand Master fought with a precision born of centuries of training and psychic discipline, his every movement an extension of unbreakable faith. Vader met him with cold, unrelenting strength, his mastery of the Force augmenting each blow. For long moments, neither gained ground. The chamber rang with the thunder of their strikes, the hum of Vader's saber counterpoint to the crackling psionic energy of the halberd. Vader moved with a relentless inevitability, pressing forward step by step. The Grand Master gave ground only when forced, his footwork perfect, his counters precise. As they fought, their wills clashed as fiercely as their weapons. Through the Force, Vader felt the Grey Knight's mind, a fortress of belief, built stone by stone through decades of service to a silent god. There was no doubt there, no hesitation. It was like striking against a mountain. You fight for a dream that has rotted, Vader said, his voice cutting through the clash of blades. Your Emperor is a relic, a prisoner on his throne. He cannot save this galaxy. Only I can. The Grand Master parried, spun, and struck, his words matching his blow. The Emperor is more than flesh. He is the will of humanity made manifest. You are nothing but ambition, wearing armor. I have seen your kind before, Vader. You will break, as all tyrants do. Vader's rage surged, feeding his strength. He drove the Grand Master back with a flurry of strikes, so fast they blurred. The halberd caught the last blow, only by a fraction, its haft vibrating from the impact. Vader extended his free hand, unleashing a wave of telekinetic force that hurled his opponent across the chamber. The Grand Master rolled to his feet, his psychic wards flaring to life around him. He slammed the halberd's butt into the ground, sending a ripple of golden light outward. The wave struck Vader like a hammer, pressing against his armor, threatening to crush him. But Vader had known greater pain. He had burned on the shores of Mustafar. He had rebuilt himself from ashes, with a roar that was more machine than man. He pushed forward, his will cutting through the psychic storm like a blade. Their final clash came at the very edge of the abyss. The Grand Master struck downward with all his strength, seeking to end it in one decisive blow. Vader sidestepped, twisting, and drove his saber through a gap in the silver armor. The blade burned through flesh and spirit alike. The Grand Master staggered, his voice a whisper. Humanity will endure. Vader's reply was cold and final. Humanity will obey. With a final motion, he cast the dying warrior into the abyss below. The halberd clattered against the stone, its light fading. The chamber fell silent save for Vader's mechanical breathing. His troops approached cautiously, their awe tempered by fear. None spoke. They knew what this victory meant. No force remained beneath the throne to oppose him. Above, terror still burned. But now, a new truth would spread like wildfire. Even the Emperor's most secret champions could not stand against the Warmaster. Vader turned his gaze upward, as though seeing through the stone and steel to the throne room far above. He could feel the withered presence upon the golden throne, silent and unmoving. No words came, no judgment, no command. The galaxy is mine, Vader said softly, a promise and a threat in one. And somewhere deep within the warp, the dark gods stirred, their laughter rolling like thunder, as they watched another piece fall into place on the great game board of eternity. The vault beneath the golden throne was silent once more, save for the hiss of Vader's respirator and the distant groan of ancient machinery that had not known rest in 10,000 years. The body of the Grand Master lay shattered in the abyss, his psychic wards extinguished like a candle snuffed out in a storm. The last true guardian of the throne was gone. Vader's victory was absolute, but it did not feel like triumph. It felt like inevitability, like the final stone falling into place in a structure that had been rising unseen for millennia. Vader ascended from the darkness, flanked by his most loyal guard. As they emerged into the higher halls of the palace, the scale of the chaos above revealed itself. Terror burned, vast columns of smoke rose into the heavens, and the streets of the throne world were battlefields. Loyalists to the old High Lords clashed with Vader's newly forged legions. Titans strode among shattered spires, their weapons leveling entire districts with every volley. The skies were thick with the contrails of aircraft and the glow of orbital bombardments. Everywhere the same chant rose, some shouting his name in adulation, others cursing it with their dying breath. The Imperial Palace itself had become the center of the storm. Legions of Imperial Guard, Adeptus Custodes, and Space Marines held its outer defenses, their gold and crimson banners defiant against the tide. Vader's forces surged against them like a living wall of black and steel. Each corridor, each gate, each stair was paid for in blood. As Vader advanced through the inner sanctums, his mind stretched far beyond his own flesh. Through the Force he felt the war in every heartbeat, a sergeant's final breath, as a bolter round tore him apart. The agony of a wounded guardsman praying to a silent emperor, the cold determination of a space marine standing alone amid a mound of corpses. It was all his. This war was a single organism, and he was its will. The planetary commander fell into step beside him, his armor scorched and dented. His voice was hoarse from shouting orders. "My lord," he rasped, bowing his head as they passed beneath an archway lined with statues of long-dead heroes. "The outer walls are ours. The Custodes fight like gods, but they are few, and they cannot hold forever. Soon we will breach the Sanctum Imperialis itself." Vader did not slow his stride. The Custodes fight for a master who cannot rise. Their loyalty is misplaced. When they see the truth, they will kneel, or they will die. The commander hesitated, then spoke carefully. "And when we reach the throne, what then? Will you speak to him?" Vader's mechanical breathing filled the pause. "I will not speak," he said at last. "There is nothing left to say." As they approached the sanctum, the resistance stiffened. Custodes clad in burnished gold struck with unmatched precision, their guardian spears reaping a terrible toll. Vader waded into their midst like a storm given form. His saber became a crimson blur, cutting through warriors whose skill rivaled that of the greatest Jedi he had once known. They were fast, almost impossibly so, but he was inexorable. The Force flowed through him like a river of molten steel, every movement precise, inevitable. Even they began to falter as their comrades fell one by one. Behind him, his legions surged forward, flooding the hallways with black-armored might. Vox orders barked across the channels, entire regiments maneuvering with perfect synchronicity. Vader's presence bound them together as surely as chains of iron. There was no hesitation, no retreat, only the relentless push forward. The great gates of the Sanctum Imperialis loomed ahead, towering constructs of gold and adamantium carved with 10,000 years of Imperial history. Titans lay shattered at their base, their machine spirits extinguished in battle. The ground trembled beneath the footsteps of advancing war engines. As Vader approached, the remaining defenders made their final stand. Custodes, Inquisitors, and loyalist space marines formed an unbroken wall before the gates. Their war cries echoed through the shattered halls, a final defiance hurled in the face of the inevitable. Vader raised his hand. Silence fell. Even the clash of battle seemed to pause for an instant. Through the Force, he reached into the minds of his foes, showing them a vision of what he had seen beneath the throne. The vast machinery, the ancient chains, the silent figure bound to a chair of decay. He showed them a galaxy on fire, their emperor's light fading into nothing. "Your god is dead," Vader's voice thundered, amplified by the Force, until it seemed to come from the stones themselves. You fight for dust and memory. I offer you victory. I offer you order. Kneel now, and live. For a heartbeat. There was hesitation, even among the custodians. Doubt flickered, but one loyalist chaplain raised his crozius and roared. For the Emperor. The defenders charged. Vader's blade ignited. A crimson sun. Amid the storm, the hall became a slaughterhouse. Bolters roared. Chain swords screamed. And psychic energy crackled like lightning. Vader moved through it all like the eye of a hurricane. Untouchable. Inevitable. His soldiers followed, cutting down the defenders in a tide of black and crimson. The battle at the gates lasted hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. At last the final loyalist fell. His body sprawled at the foot of the great doors. The gates themselves were shattered, their ancient wards undone by sheer force of will. Beyond lay the throne room. The chamber was vast, a space so immense it seemed to defy reason. The golden throne sat at its center, surrounded by a web of machinery older than empires. Thousands of cables and conduits stretched outward, feeding into the endless mechanisms that sustained the Emperor's fading light. Vader approached slowly, each step echoing in the cavernous silence. The figure upon the throne was still withered beyond recognition, its flesh sustained only by the machinery that bound it, yet the power emanating from it was immense. A tidal wave of psychic energy that pressed against Vader's mind. For a moment he felt something almost like recognition, not words, not thoughts, but a presence vast and impersonal, like a star gazing upon a single grain of sand. Behind him, the planetary commander and the surviving soldiers knelt, overwhelmed by awe. "My lord," the commander whispered, voice trembling, "we are here. The galaxy waits for your command." Vader's respirator hissed. His gaze never left the throne. "The galaxy has waited long enough," he said. He raised his saber, its crimson glow casting long shadows across the ancient machinery. And in that moment, far across the warp, the dark gods laughed. Their game was reaching its final move, and whether the galaxy was saved or damned would depend on what came next. The march was over. The reckoning had begun. The air within the throne room was suffocating, heavy with the weight of 10,000 years of devotion, decay and unspoken fear. Vast machines hummed and groaned like ancient titans chained to their posts, their conduits running thick with sacred oils and the blood of countless sacrifices. The light from the golden spires overhead was dim, filtering through smoke, and the lingering haze of incense that had been burned here, every day for millennia. It was less a room and more a mausoleum, a tomb for both the living and the dead. At its center sat the golden throne itself, a colossal structure of metal and bone, its architecture an unfathomable blend of genius and madness. The figure seated upon it was scarcely human, a withered husk encased in the machinery that sustained his psychic presence. Tubes and wires pierced pallid flesh, carrying not life, but function, sustaining a beacon that stretched across the galaxy.
His eyes were closed, his lips unmoving, yet his mind, the sheer immensity of it, radiated through the warp like the beating heart of a god. Vader advanced slowly, each footfall echoing through the chamber like a drumbeat of inevitability. His respirator's mechanical hiss joined the chorus of the throne's ancient workings, a counterpoint to the ceaseless labor of the machine. Behind him, his soldiers knelt in reverent silence, unable to look directly upon the throne without trembling. Even the hardened commander who had followed him through fire and ruin now prostrated himself, overcome by awe and terror. But Vader did not kneel. The Force thrummed violently here, a storm of conflicting wills and ancient memories. He felt the weight of countless spikers who had burned themselves to ash, sustaining this mechanism. He felt the despair of billions who had died in the Emperor's name, their faith feeding a system they could never comprehend. Above all, he felt the presence of the being upon the throne, immense, alien and yet familiar in its absolute commands. For a fleeting moment, he remembered another master, Sidious, dark and cunning, seated upon his own throne as he had whispered promises of power and order. That memory was bitter ash in Vader's mind. He had been servant, weapon and slay. He had risen, only to find himself bound once more by another's vision. Never again. He came to a halt at the base of the throne's towering dais. The figure above did not stir, yet through the force there was acknowledgement, not words, but the faintest flicker of awareness, vast and impersonal. Vader felt the Emperor's gaze like a weight pressing down upon him, stripping away armor and flesh, to judge the raw core of his will. "You are dying," Vader said at last, his voice low but resonant, carrying through the silent chamber. "Your Imperium rots, while you sit upon this chair of rust and bone. You are no longer a ruler. You are a beacon, and a prison." The presence pressed harder, not in anger but in sheer overwhelming force. Vader's knees almost buckled, but he stood firm. He had endured fire and agony before. He would not bend now. "I have seen the truth," he continued, his words gaining strength. "Your priests preach faith while they feast upon decay. Your lords plot and scheme while entire worlds burn. The galaxy tears itself apart, and you do nothing." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from deep within the warp, Vader felt a ripple, faint but unmistakable, a single thought, vast and cold, brushing against his mind. It was not language but meaning. "You would replace me." Vader's respirator hissed, a sound like a blade being drawn. "Yes." As the word left him, the temperature in the chamber plummeted, the lights dimmed, and the machines surrounding the throne roared as though in pain. The psychic presence surged, filling every corner of the room, a tidal wave of power so vast, it threatened to tear Vader's mind apart. Visions assailed him, the Great Crusade, legions marching beneath the Emperor's banner, the Horus heresy and the galaxy aflame, a million worlds screaming in war. It was history itself, a torrent of memory meant to break him. Vader staggered beneath the onslaught, his mechanical limbs straining, his breath ragged. He saw Horus, the first Warmaster, kneeling before this same throne before his rebellion. He saw the final duel between father and son, the Emperor's body broken, his dreams shattered, and then he saw himself, standing where Horus once stood, a figure cloaked in shadow and flame. The vision shifted. In one future he ruled as absolute master, the galaxy united beneath his iron will. In another, he lay broken and dead, his armies scattered, the dark gods feasting on the ruins of all he had built. The Emperor's will crashed down upon him, immense and undeniable. The message was clear: submit or be annihilated. Vader roared, his voice drowning out even the machines. He drew upon every shard of rage, every scar of loss, every ounce of pain that had ever forged him. The force surged through him, red and black, a storm given form. He met the Emperor's will with his own, unyielding. "I am no one's servant," he thundered. "Not the dark gods, not the High Lords, not even you. I bring order, because none else will. The galaxy will kneel, not to faith, not to ruin, but to me." The psychic clash shook the chamber, walls cracked and the great statues lining the hall toppled. The kneeling soldiers screamed as blood poured from their eyes and ears. The commander collapsed, clutching his head, caught between powers beyond mortal comprehension. At last, the storm broke. Vader stood panting, his armor scorched, his cape tattered. The throne was silent once more, its occupant unmoving. Whether the Emperor's mind had been shattered or merely withdrawn, Vader could not tell. Only the faint hum of the Astronomicon remained, flickering like a dying flame. Slowly, Vader ascended his boots rang against the golden steps, each one a declaration. At the top, he turned and faced the chamber, his crimson blade deactivated with a hiss. Behind him, the galaxy trembled. Fleets across a million worlds waited for orders. Entire sectors stood poised between rebellion and obedience. All eyes were upon terror. Vader seated himself upon the golden throne. The ancient mechanisms stirred, accepting a new master. His respirator's hiss merged with the machine's breath, a single terrible harmony. Far across the warp, the dark gods fell silent. Even they, for a moment, were uncertain. In the streets below, the cry went up, rolling like thunder, across the planet. It was not the Emperor's name they shouted now, it was Vader's. The throne had not been claimed for salvation, it had been claimed for conquest. And from that seat of rust and bone, a new era would begin, not of hope, but of order enforced by fear.
The golden throne still burned, but now its light was a crimson fire, heralding a future built on ash.